Our second story is the stories of Homer. When the Greeks began to learn how to read and write, one of them decided to write down the old Greek stories that had been told out loud around Greek fires for years and years. His name was Homer, and he was the first great writer. Tradition tells us that Homer was blind, so he listened to the stories he heard, and then he wrote them down using the Greek alphabet. Homer wrote the story of a famous war, the Greek attack on the city of Troy. This war was called the Trojan War, and Homer tells about it in his long poem, the Iliad. After finishing the Iliad, he wrote another story called the Odyssey. The Odyssey was about Odysseus, a Greek warrior who fought in the Trojan War. When Odysseus started to sail back home, he ran into all kinds of trouble. Here is one of the stories from the Odyssey. Odysseus and his men sailed away from Troy, looking forward to their return home. They praised all the gods of Greece for keeping them alive through the war, and they thanked the gods for their victory. But they forgot to thank Poseidon, the god of the sea. Poseidon was furious at being left out. He sent a strong wind to blow the ships off course so that Odysseus would have a hard time getting home. Odysseus and his men got lost out there on the sea. After many days of sailing, Odysseus and his tired, hungry sailors saw a beautiful island. It was cool and shady, full of wheat and grapevines and wild goats that could be killed for food. So they landed their ships on the beach, got out their bows and arrows, and hunted. When they had killed enough meat, they lit fires, roasted the goats, and feasted. And the next morning, when the dawn lit the sky red, they got up to explore. Around the other side of the island, Odysseus and his men found a huge cave carved into a cliff. Laurel trees grew all around it. In front of the cave was a pen, walled with stone and filled with hundreds of sheep and goats. "Who lives here?" Odysseus asked. "Let's go in and find out." He took with him his 12 strongest men, along with a jug of sweet wine, as a present. The rest of his men he sent back to the ships. Odysseus and his 12 companions came up to the cave and peered in, but they could see no one. Carefully they crept in. There they found pens of lambs and baby goats. The walls were lined with racks of cheeses, each cheese bigger than a man's head. Beneath them sat the bowls into which the cave's owner milked his goats, each bowl large enough for a man to lie down in. When they saw this, Odysseus's men were terrified. "A giant lives here," they said. "Let's take some cheese and some of the lambs and get back to the ship before he returns." But Odysseus refused to run away. "We'll wait here and greet him when he returns," he said. So the men cut up some cheese and ate it for their dinners, after offering some of it to the gods as a sacrifice. And they waited. Dark fell over the island, and when it was completely dark, they heard footsteps, each one shaking the ground. In through the door came the cave's owner. He was a giant, as tall as 3 men standing on each other's shoulders. He had only one eye, right in the center of his forehead. He was a Cyclops. The Cyclops was herding his sheep in front of him, and he carried over his shoulder 3 or 4 trees that he had pulled up for firewood. He flung them onto the floor of the cave with such noise that Odysseus and his men hid themselves in fright. When all the sheep were inside the cave, the Cyclops rolled a huge stone across the cave's entrance, a stone so heavy that 20 men couldn't have shifted it aside. He milked his sheep and goats and got up to light his fire. When the flames roared up, the Cyclops saw Odysseus and his men hiding at the far end of the cave. "Well," he roared, "what do we have here? Robbers? Have you crept into my cave to take my sheep and my cheese?" "No," Odysseus said, his voice shaking with fright. "We're merely travelers on our way home. Please show us some kindness and hospitality. We are hungry and cold." "If you are travelers," said the Cyclops, "where is your ship?" But Odysseus was afraid that the Cyclops might want to find the ship and destroy it, so he lied. "We were shipwrecked on your island," he said, "and our ship is destroyed." The Cyclops didn't answer. Instead, he snatched up 2 of Odysseus's men and ate them on the spot. And then he washed down his horrible meal with goat's milk, lay down on the floor, and went to sleep. "Let's kill him while he sleeps," Odysseus's men urged him, but Odysseus refused. "If we kill him," he said, "who will let us out of the cave? That stone is too heavy for us to move. We would die in here." So Odysseus and his men spent the night huddled in the back of the cave, listening to the Cyclops snore as loud as thunder. The Cyclops slept all night. When the red dawn came, he woke up, lit his fire, milked the goats, and grabbed 2 or more of Odysseus's men for breakfast. After he ate them and drank some more milk, he pushed the stone away from the entrance to the cave and drove the sheep out. But before Odysseus and his men could dash out of the cave, the Cyclops rolled the stone back again, as easy as putting a lid on a jar. Odysseus's men were terrified, moaning and crying, but Odysseus paced up and down the cave and thought hard. Finally, he went to the pile of trees that the Cyclops had brought for firewood. Several of them still lay beside the sheep pen, where the Cyclops had dropped them. One of the trees was tall and green. Come on, Odysseus said to his men. Be brave. Do what I say and we'll escape. Let's cut a long piece off the end of this tree, about as long as a man is tall, and sharpen it. Don't ask why, just do what I say. The men cut the tree and sharpened it, and then Odysseus burned the sharp point into the coals of the fire until it was hard and black. He hid it underneath a pile of straw, and then he and his men waited all day long for the Cyclops to come back. When the monster came back into the cave that evening, he drove his sheep and goats in and again sealed up the door with a huge stone. Then he grabbed 2 more of the men and ate them, washing them down with goat's milk. And then Odysseus took his courage in both hands and went forward. Cyclops, he said, you've eaten so many of my men and you must be thirsty. Milk won't help that thirst. Here, I've got a jug of the best sweet wine you've ever tasted. He held up the jug of wine that he had brought into the cave, and the Cyclops sniffed it. It smelled so good that he drank a mouthful, and then another, and another. Soon the whole jug of wine was gone, and the Cyclops was very sleepy. What's your name? He growled. Who's giving me this wonderful stuff to drink? My name is Nomen, Odysseus said. Nomen, I am pleased with your wine, the Cyclops answered, so I'll eat you last. And with that he sprawled over and went to sleep right there on the ground. Then Odysseus and 4 of his men dragged out the sharp log that they had hid in the straw, and drove it right into the Cyclops' single eye. The Cyclops leaped and roared with pain. He stumbled all around his cave, grabbing blindly for Odysseus and his men. But they easily got away from him, because he could no longer see them. Soon Odysseus and his men heard other footsteps outside the cave. The Cyclops' friend and neighbors had come to see what all the noise was about. Why are you making so much noise? They called to the Cyclops. You're keeping us from sleeping. Is someone attacking you? No man, the Cyclops yelled. No man is trying to kill me. No man? The other monsters answered. Well, then go back to sleep. And they all went away. The Cyclops, groaning with pain, lay down until morning. Then he got up, feeling his way around with his hands, and rolled the stone away. He started to herd the sheep and goats out of the cave, but he reached down and patted the back of every animal that went past him, so that neither Odysseus nor his men could sneak out with the sheep and goats. So Odysseus caught 3 fat sheep for every one of his men, and tied the sheep together in groups of 3. He told each one of his men to hold onto the stomach fleece of the sheep in the middle of each group, and to let the sheep carry them out past the Cyclops. The Cyclops put his hand on the sheep's back, but he couldn't find the men who were holding on underneath. When Odysseus and his men had gotten past the Cyclops, they ran for their ships. The rest of the men saw them coming. Odysseus started to yell, "Pull for the sea! Pull for the sea!" And as soon as they had scrambled aboard, the oarsmen rowed the ships out into the water, safely, away from the island of the Cyclops. Then Odysseus began to shout, "Cyclops! Cyclops! See what happens when you eat your guests who come to your house? You should have known better than to fall for my tricks." The blind Cyclops heard his jeers. In fury, he wrenched a boulder off the side of the cliff and threw it towards Odysseus' voice. Waves pushed the ship around, but Odysseus shouted again, "Cyclops, if anyone asks you who put your eye out and spoiled your beauty, you tell them that it was Odysseus." "Curses on you," the Cyclops yelled back. "I am the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea, and I will ask him to send waves and wind that will sink your ship so that you'll never reach home alive." Odysseus ignored the Cyclops' threat. He told his men to row for the open water. As soon as they were far away from the island, their sails caught the wind, and they headed for home. But Poseidon heard Cyclops' requests. He sent the wind to blow Odysseus off course, and waves to batter his ship into pieces. It took 10 long years and many dangerous adventures before Odysseus finally reached home.